Today's share is Masechta Nazir Daf Lamed. We'll begin Masechta Nazir Daf Chav Tesam and Beis, about 12 lines from the bottom. We are discussing over here the right that father has the right to make his son, let's say his 8-year-old son, into a Nazir. We had previously a machlokes in the top of the page between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. Ad Mosai, you see it, Ad Mosai, until how long could a father have the right to make his son into a Nazir? And Rebbe said until the kid's bar mitzvah, and more than just bar mitzvah, he has to have 2 hairs under his arm. So if we check that he has 2 hairs under his arm, then the right of the father to make his son into a Nazir is suspended, is actually goes away. He loses that power. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, he says it's an earlier age. It's at the age of 12. At the age of 12, midrabanan, a boy can become sort of like a gadol, in that if he is somewhat intelligent and he understands what it means to make a commitment, what it means to make a neder, so then the rabbis treat him as a gadol, and that his neder is a neder. So up until that point, so that's usually at the age of 12. So up until that point, the father has a right to make him a neder, but beyond that point of 12, and he's yegia la'onos nedarim, so then he does not lose his right. He loses his right to make his son into a neder. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda has an earlier date than Rebbe. So that's what the Gemara said prior to that. Another point that we're going to see in this Gemara later on, and we'll just bring it out right now, is that according to Rebbe, since a boy turns a gadol midaraisa at age 13 and 2 hairs, so that if the father made his son into a Nazir, and then the boy turned into a gadol with 2 hairs, so it could be a middle of his Naziris, it goes away, because he's a gadol midaraisa, and pow, it disappears. So he could be a middle of his Naziris, and it ends. On the other hand, even according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, that the father gets his rights suspended when the kid turns 12, and he's precocious, so that even if the father made him a Nazir, and then he turned 12 and he was smart of Higia la'onos nedarim, the Naziris doesn't disappear, because this whole thing of becoming a gadol at age 12 is only midrabanan anyway. So he continues on with the Naziris, even though technically, if the father wants to remake him a Nazir, he would lose that right. But if he started him as a Nazir prior to that, the boy has to continue to be a Nazir. So let us see the Gemara. Lema hani tanoi kahani tanoi. The Gemara says lema, but it means that the following tanoim, Rebbe, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, are exactly the same thing what these following tanoim said. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Ma'aseh Rab Chanina, there's a story about Rab Chanina. Rab Chanina was a boy. Let's say he was 13. Shedira of a Nazir. Oh, I have it here. That his father made him a Nazir at the age of 13. Now we weren't sure if he had the 2 hairs or he did not have the 2 hairs. I mean, did the father have a right to make his son Rab Chanina into a Nazir? So they had to bring him to Rabbi Gamliel. This is on Rabbi Gamliel in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and he had to check him out to see if the father indeed had that power still. Rabbi Gamliel was examining Rab Chanina later to investigate if the boy brought 2 hairs or did not bring. So if he did not bring, then the father's Naziris that he made on his behalf of his son is effective. If not, if he did bring 2 saras, then it had no effect. He's not a Nazir. So that's what they brought him before Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Yossi says the story is a little different. Rabbi Chanina was not a 13-year-old boy, but he was actually a 12-year-old boy. And it wasn't a test to see if he had 2 hairs under his arm, but rather it was a test that he has an IQ. He checked him out to see if he understands what the meaning of an eder is. Then midrabanan, he's considered to be a gadol, or if not. So it was a machlekes exactly what the story was all about. So we see that according to the Tanakama, the power of the father ends to make his son a Nazir only when he turns 13 with 2 hairs. And according to Rabbi Yossi, since he interprets the story it happened a little different. His understanding is that the father's power ends when the boy turns 12, and higia la'onis nadarim. So the Gemara tells us that the story continued. Amalai. So Rabbi Chanina told Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi, Al titzta'el, don't put yourself bother to check me out. In katan ani. So the way the Gemara is understanding now, he's saying if I am 12 years old and not reached oinus nadarim, so that's therefore my father had a right to make me a nazir. I'm going to be a nazir because of my father. In Godalani, if you consider me an old, a mature person, and you call me Hegiyah Oinus Nadarim, so I'm 12 plus I have the precociousness of Oinus Nadarim. So therefore, Midrabanan, my father had no right to make me a Nazir. So Eya Bishvilasmi, he says, I'm going to commit to be a Nazir because of myself. I want to be a Nazir now. Ahmed Rabbi Gamliel heard such commitment. He got up and Meshach al-Raishi gave the little boy a kiss on his head. Amar, he said, I'm confident that this boy is going to turn out to be someone special in Klal Yisrael, a Moira Halacha, the one who we follow the Halacha. We have to understand why he saw that he would be a Moira Halacha b'Yisrael. Maybe he'll just be a tzaddik, somebody who's the gadol that you're going to trust him in Halacha. But Rav Gamliel, for some reason, saw the precious of the child and the kedusha of this boy, and he said, I'm guaranteed that this boy is going to turn into somebody special. Amru, the story ends, the Chachamim who repeated this brisa said that's exactly what happened. It didn't take too long after the story, maybe when the kid was a teenager, until the child became a gadol b'Yisrael. So the Gemara now says a question. Bishlam Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, who says that the key to turning the boy into a gadol is 12 years old. The Amma who said Shagila Oinus Nadarim told the kid is 12 years old and knows how to make a neder. That's the cutoff point. So then I understand why Rab Chanina, the boy, said, the boy said, in Katanani, if you think I'm just younger than 12 and I don't have the maturity, Abba, that's why I'm going to be a Nazir, because my father made me a Nazir. So, and then if not, if you consider me precocious, I'm going to be a Nazir because I'm taking upon my Nazirs at this moment. But the cutoff point was 12 years old. And that's what he seemed to be saying, that the cutoff point, the kid kept saying that the cutoff point is 12 years old. According to Rebbe, that the father still has the power to make his son into a Nazir until the boy is mature enough, he's 13 years old, and he has 2 hairs. So in Gadol Ani Eya B'Shvil Atzmi, if I'm 12 years old, I'm over 12 and I'm mature, I want to take on a Naziris now. That's what Rab Chanina said. He can't be a Nazir right now because the father still has that power. We go to Chaf Lamed Amud Aleph, Habashus Davu Kamen. He's still in the jurisdiction of the power because according to Rebbe, the father's power extends until after the boy is bar mitzvah, even until the boy has 2 hairs. So what did Rab Chanina say when he said, you don't have to check me, even if I'm precocious and over 12, I want to be a Nazir by myself? That's not true. You can't be a Nazir by yourself. You have to ask, it's only your father that can make you a Nazir. So the Gemara says, according to Rebbe, the story was a little different. Ella, that's what he meant to say. The story happened, the Omar, that the boy was over 13, and they were checking him if he still has 2 hairs. According to Rebbe, the story ends a little different. And they're checking him, Rab Chanina, to check him to see if he has 2 hairs. He was over 13. And this is what he said. If you don't find 2 hairs, then I'm certainly going to be a Nazir because of my father. And if you do find 2 hairs, I want to be a Nazir now because I'm a gadol. Fine. Now the Gemara asks another question. The Gemara's question right now is, what would happen? When did the father come with the boy to check him if he's Nazir? Let's assume that the father made him a Nazir that day, and then they ran to Rabbi Gamliel to check if the father had a right to make him a Nazir. So, according to Rebbe, the cutoff point is when the kid has 2 hairs. He's 13 with 2 hairs. So the Gemara says like this: if Rabbi Gamliel, everything makes sense up to a point. Because if Rabbi Gamliel would discover that the kid had 2 hairs from prior, So prior to the father making him a nazir. So let's say Rabbi Gamliel will discover that these hairs are a little bit long, and that the kid was probably mature before, and therefore the father did not have a right to make him a nazir. So then I understand. Kohen needs years delay. So then this boy made himself a commitment. Hanina made himself a commitment that he's going to be a nazir. So he's a nazir right now on his own volition, and he can bring karbonas. Let's say Lubsaif. Let's say it was at the end. Let's say his father made him a nazir 30 days prior. And then he kept the Naziris for 30 days. And now they're coming to Rabbi Gamliel to see if the father had a right to make him a Nazir. And let's say they discover that he didn't have any hairs. Kohen ben Nazir's Davu. Then he had a right to be a Nazir because of his father made him a Nazir. And therefore, he could bring karbonis because he already completed the Naziris that his father made him into a Nazir. But let's say they discover right now. Let's say right now he comes to his father, and the father just made him a nazir. They came to Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Gamliel discovered that he has no hair. So he said he declared him to be a nazir because his father made him a nazir. You don't have 2 hairs. Your father has the power to make you a nazir. But why wouldn't we be concerned about that? Let's say a week after that, the hairs start growing. If the hairs start to grow, then the father's naziris disappears. And even if he completes the naziris, even if he would complete the naziris, he would not be required to bring a carbon because there's no naziris anymore. Even if he now accepted it upon himself, but he didn't complete a naziris, so therefore, how is that going to ever make sense? He isa b'mitzi, but let's say he brings the hairs in the middle of the naziris, so it depends. According to Rabbi Yehuda, let's say he turns precocious at age 12. That the question was he precocious or not? Let's say they determined he wasn't precocious and his father had a right to make him a nazir. Even if, so at 12, his father made him a nazir. And then let's say 2 weeks later he turns brilliant and he's oinus nadarim. Still, the father's naziris doesn't disappear. He still remains a nazir because this whole thing of determining that a boy who's 12 years old could become, we consider him as an adult, is only drabanim. And the power that the father has a right to make him an naziris is a stronger drabanim than this kid turning mufla samach leish yigila einus nadarim. The alma achi yigila einus nadarim. Ella, so it makes sense. The story could make sense according to Rabbi Yehuda. Ella Rebbe, according to Rebbe, we have a big problem. The alma achi yavi stays sa'ares until the kid brings 2 hairs. So let's say they determined that when he came to Rabbi Gamliel, he did not have 2 hairs. So Rabbi Gamliel says to him, "You're a nazir because of your father." And then, but there's a possibility that the kid is going to have 2 hairs a week later, and then the naziris flies away. So how are you going to tell this kid after 30 days to bring a carbon when he's not going to be a nazir? Even if you want to say after a week he becomes a nazir because he wants to become a nazir, he's only a nazir for 3 weeks. So how is this all going to make sense? Amrei. So the answer, the Rabbanan answered, Rebbe Leke Takanta, according to Rebbe, there won't be any possibility to bring a carbon until he's a nazir because of his own volition and because of his father. So according to Rebbe, he would have to stay 60 days to be a nazir, and then we know for sure that this kid has to bring a carbon no matter what. New Mishnah. The Mishnah says, we had this before many times, that if a person dies, and he was a nazir, he was a nazir, completed his naziris, and set aside money, unspecified money to bring for his karbanos naziris. What we do is, after he dies, the halacha b'Moshe Sinai says we take all this money and dump it into the pushka in the base of Migdash so that they could buy carbon oilus finin. Despite the fact that there's a carbon chata somewhere in the middle of this money, but since he didn't specify what the money is to be used, exactly how the money is to be broken down, so the halacha b'Moshe Sinai says, take this whole pile of money and put it into the pushka for a carbon oila. Now, there's a din also that if a father died and left over money, let's say for his carbon chatas, he left over money, he did an averis Michal Shabbos, and then he left over money to purchase a carbon chatas. He said, put it in his drawer. I'm going to use this money to buy a carbon chatas. So when he dies and didn't get a chance to bring the carbon chatas, we dump the money, we take the money and throw it into Yam HaMelech, because the son can inherit the money and say, oh, when I'm going to do an Avera and I'm Mechayev a carbon chatas, I'm going to use this money. No, the Pasuk says that no, when you do an Avera, you can't use your father's money to bring a carbon chatas. But we're going to learn something special about Naziris right now. Mishnah says, Ha'ish megaleach al Naziris aviv. A person, a son, could use his father's money to he could use his father's money to bring his own carbonis if he is a nazir, if his father passed away. But this only applies to a boy using his father's money. But a girl whose father left over Naziris money, she can't use that money to pay for her Naziris carbonas. So this is only a din by a boy and not by a girl. And the Gemara is going to explain why is that so. And the Gemara is going to say it's a halacha l'meshvisine. Don't try to figure this one out. But the boy could inherit the money, and instead of throwing it into the carbon oila, he could use it for his own carbonis, but the girl cannot. Ketzad. Now, it's not in all cases. Mishahaya, we're going to learn with the Girsa of the Taisvis, which is most Rishonim learn that way. If you and your father, who were Aviv Nazir, if both him and his father were Nazir at the same time, the Hifra Shmoy Stumim al Nizirasi, and then the father, prior to him when he completed his Naziris, or even when he didn't complete his Naziris, but he set aside Ma'oy Stumin, unspecified money to pay for his Karbanis Nazirusai, Umeis, and he died. So now both him and his father were Nazir at the same time. Va'amar. And now the boy said, you know what? Let me complete my Naziris, and I'm going to use my father's money that he left over to pay for my Karbanis Naziris. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, not true. That money has to go to the base of Migdash, put it into Pushka, Nadava, because you were obligated on your Naziris while your father was alive. And therefore you can't use his Karbanis money to pay for your Karbanis. He has no right to use his father's money. What's a case where a person uses his father's money that he left over? When could a son use his father's money that he left over? Again, it's unspecified money. If your father was the only Nazir, and then and then he left over money, plain money for his Naziris, and then he died. So the father was a Nazir, he left over, and he separated money that he was going to bring his Karbanis Naziris, but unspecified. He just said, this is the money that I'm going to use to buy my Karbanis Naziris, and then he died. And then the son said, you know what, I'm now becoming a Nazir on condition that I can use this money to pay for my Karbanis Naziris. Zahu, that is the case, then he's a right to use his father's money. He has a right to use his father's money. So tomorrow I want to understand, my Tama, why is it that the boy can use his father's money and the girl cannot use the father's money? Rabbi Yochanan says, halachi b'nazir. It's halacha l'mayshasine that only a boy can use it and not the girl. So the Gemara says, what do I need a halacha l'mayshasine? Pshita, it's obvious. What's the chiddush? A girl never inherits anything from her father. She's not a yoresh. She's not an inheritor midaraisa. Remember, what is the novelty of that? The ben yoresh is that's because the son inherits that monies from his father. Therefore, he can use it as a carbon. And a girl doesn't inherit. A girl never inherits the money from his father. Bas loy. But the girl doesn't inherit the father's money. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah is telling you a novelty, and I need this. The halacha l'mayshmin sine says, the lesle elabas, in a situation where there's only a daughter, and the only one that's going to be inheriting the money is the daughter, not there's no sons, there's no brother, she's an only daughter, and therefore she inherits that money. The halacha l'mayshmin says that she still can't use that money for her own naziris. Because Ma'od the same, I would have thought Yarshim Gemira law that the halacha l'mayshmin says that anybody who inherits the money can use that money. So if it's a daughter, she could use that money. Go to Lamed Amud Beis, Kamash Malon halacha. The halacha l'mayshmin says that she cannot use the money. Now the Gemara asks a few questions. Ibailu, let me ask you a question. Rabbi Yossi was one that came up with this novelty that a boy can use his father's money. So the Gemara says, Pligla Rabbanan leid Rabbi Yossi. Do Rabbanan absolutely argue against Rabbi Yossi, and they hold there's no such idea? Or like Pligo, or not, or they don't argue. They argue, Pliga Reisha, Seifa. Do they argue against the ratio or Seifa? If they argue against any situation, the last case of the Mishnah, which is the case where the father was a Nazir and then died, then the son became a Nazir, and the Rabbanan said even in that situation, the boy can't become a Nazir, or can't use the father's money. Or maybe the Chachamim are only arguing in the Reisha, where in the case where both he and the father were a Nazir at the same time, Rabbi Yossi says the boy cannot use the the father's money. Comes along the Rabbanim, perhaps the Rabbanim are of the opinion, and even in that situation, the boy can use the money. So the Gemara says that's the case. That yes. Tashma, let me prove it to you. What is the case where a boy could use his father's money? And this is Rabbi Yossi's opinion. If only the father was a Nazir and he left over money, then the son decides to become a Nazir. In that situation, the son could use the money of his father. But let's say him and his father were both Nazir at the same time. Then the father gave over money for his Naziris and then died. In that situation, we throw the money in the pushka because both he and his father were Nazir at the same time. And this is what the Mishnah said. Our Mishnah said that. But our Mishnah only had the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Meir, and Yehuda both all say, that's a situation where you can, even in that situation, you can use your father's money. So all the Rabbanan, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda were much more lenient and much more expansive on this halacha l'moishe Sinai. That not only if the father was a Nazir and then died and then the son became a Nazir, but even in the situation when they were both Nazirim at the same time, when the father dies, the son has a right to use the father's money for Naziris, for his karbanos, and that was included in the halacha l'moishe Sinai. Now comes a couple of questions. Is it a din in Yerusha? Rabba has the question. Yesh lebanim shnei banim Nazirim. The person has two sons that are Nazirs. Mahu, what would be the din? Hilchas and Gemira, let's say, so do both get the money? Mahu, Hilchas and Gemira law called the Kadam Galach Gala. Is the halacha l'moishe Sinai that teaches us that whoever uses the money first gets the money? Dilma, no. Maybe no one has a right to use the money first. It's like any Yerusha. Yerusha Gemira law. The halacha l'moishe Sinai said this is a Yerusha, and therefore upalga hava. You split it between the two brothers. Not one brother can scarf all the money and use it for his own Naziris. No, it's something that's split evenly. So what was the halacha l'moishe Sinai? Rabba asked the question. B'char upashet. Let's say one brother is an older brother, so he's supposed to get pi shnayim, double, and the other brother was a regular kid. Ma hilchas gemira law is the halacha l'moishe Sinai plain, and you don't. It's not a din in Yerusha, and therefore, you don't have to use the monies according to what you would take in a regular Yerusha. No. We would say that either that whoever finishes the Naziris first gets to use it, even if it's the younger brother. Dilma Yerusha, it's really Yerusha, and the younger brother has no right to use the whole money. He can only use about a third of the money. Just like the older brother, when he normally Yerusha takes pishnayim, that's how we divide it up over here. That the older brother, if he's a Nazir, will use the money for, if he's a Nazir, if both of them are Nazirim, of course, the older money will take 2/3 of the money, and the younger brother will take 1/3 of the money. If you want to say Yerushahi, that it's Yerushahi, ulufim d'shakal magaleach. And when you need it, you can take according to what you need. You can use the money, but maybe we'll even limit it that. In chulin, yes, I say a bechar takes pishnayim, but maybe since we're dealing with hegdish over here, we would say that. Yes, I know it's a din Yerusha, and both boys should be able, the oldest boy and the younger boy should be able to inherit this money and use it for their karbanos naziris respectively, but I wouldn't say that strong that the bechor should take pishnayim, because only when they inherit chulin, non-hegdish money. Since they're inheriting hegdish money, we should split it evenly. Since this is set aside for Naziris money, to pay for Kabbanis Naziris, we would still give the power to the older brother to get Pishnayim. So the Gemara has all these questions. Now the Gemara says, let's say the father was an Aviv Nazir Oilam, who Nazir Stam. The father was a Nazir Oilam, which means that he's a Nazir forever, but every now and then he would take a haircut. And he set aside this Kabbanis for a haircut that he was going to get. And he is a Nazir Stam, a regular Nazir. Aviv Nazir Stam, let's say he's a regular, his father was a regular Nazir, who Nazir Oilam, and he's a Nazir Oilam. Mao, can he use the halacha? I mean, in other words, does the halacha l'moishe require that the son and the father should be the same type of nazar? When this halacha l'moishe is when they're both regular nazars. Dilma, makes no difference. If one of them is Nazir Oilam and the other one is a Nazir Stam, it doesn't matter. The son can use the father's money. The imtim shaloima, if you want to say that it can work in that situation, hacha, because both of them are Naziris Tahira. That's why the son can use the father's money, even though they're different types of Nazirs. The father may be a Nazir Oilam, he may be a Nazir Stam, or the opposite, but both are Naziris Tahara. They're both using these monies for the carbonas that you bring as a Nazir Tahar. But boy, Rav Ashi asked the question of if Nazir Tamik, if the father was a Nazir Tamik, and he set aside this money to buy the ophos and the carbon asham, and he is a nazatar, and he wants to use the money to buy his carbonis when he finishes his naziris tahara. Aviv nazatar, who nazatar. Let's say the opposite. The father set aside this money because he was a nazatar, and he's a nazatame, and he wants to use these carbonis for the carbonis that you bring when you're a nazatame. Why would you say that halacha allows the son to use the father's money? All these questions remain unresolved, so it's not so clear of what the halacha l'mayshusine and how far the halacha l'mayshusine was in the idea of a son using his father's money that he left over for his own karbanis naziris. Adon Allah mi sha'amar.